How are you? Good. I love the same brand. I'm out of there. I hope
close there, sorry. Welcome everyone. My name is Paul Bailey, George Paul Bailey, actually, and I want to welcome everyone to the memorial service for George Edward Bailey, my father. We're going to jump around a few things this morning, talk a little bit about what he did in his life, have some speakers come up and talk about some of the myriad of aspects that kind of are addressed a little bit by some of the artifacts and pictures that you see around on the stage. But I wanted to start off by reading a couple of things that he wrote in the last couple of months. The first thing was a letter that many of you may have received from May 2004, and the letter went like this. I'm on an extended and permanent vacation. Most of my family has joined me for the terrestrial portion. Doctors indicate a limited time on Earth for me. I'll post travel plans and as we make them on our website and gives to the website. Please join us if you're able. See ya. And that was kind of his attitude about it. He wasn't really too concerned about the prognosis was what it was, and there was not a lot to do about it except to take action, which he was good at, being spontaneous and taking action and going out and living life. And so we had that opportunity that some people don't have, that you know something may eventually happen, certainly in anybody's life, but we had the chance to travel around with George for a little bit. We went to, my brother and I went with him to the Indianapolis 500, and we went to a Wrigley Field for a Cubs game, and one of the best things about it was that we got the pass for the guy who's in the wheelchair, so we got right up front. Can't beat that. He was very amused by these things. He says, "Boy, I should have thought of that earlier." But he then also wrote another thing, and we know that there are a variety of different faiths and beliefs and things in the room. So this was his take on that. Okay, let's talk about freedom of religion. This means to me that any group that can profess a religious belief, and it should be honored under the freedom of religion parts of the Constitution, which is fine by me. The freedom to ignore religion is not supported. If some higher power is in control of everything, okay. If not, okay. My life has been adequate to fulfill a higher power system for the most part, and I'm not worried about it. So thanks for your concern, and goodbye. And he wrote that to kind of express his feelings. What we'd like to do now for the religious piece of this ceremony would just be to have everyone reflect for a moment in silence on what your beliefs are, and then we'll rejoin the ceremony. Thank you. Now I'd like to introduce my sister Charlene, who will come up and guide us a little bit through what we're going to do next.
I think it's because I live in the land of tourism in Florida, so we're going to look at some of Daddy's stuff. And as those of you who know him, he really liked his stuff. So I'll have Paul help me out here. The first item is the chess set. As many of you know, he was involved in the Colorado and U.S. Chess Federation. And it was a game that he tried to teach us all. The boys and Valerie took to it a little more than I did. Then his NRA lifetime member, Cap, he's recently gotten very concerned about gun owners' rights and legislation in that. His hat from the Indianapolis 500. And one of the great passions of his life, sports car racing and sports car rallying. We have a few trophies from the ski Treffen, Gymkhana and Street Treffen, and some of the rallies where we got some neat trophies. And then across the front of the stage, you see how he totally embraced the vanity tag system here. So you're driving down 6th Avenue with Daddy, and people roll down their windows and scream, "Hey, George!" And you keep going. Some of the pictures from his life, from Paul and James's wedding reception a couple years ago. The watermelon, and you'll see lots of pictures in the slideshow. Now behind me is a sculpture that he did. Is he still in college?
I think so.
Yeah. That was representation of his feelings about the Korean War and things that went on. And we always were amused as kids that the navel of this creature was a trumpet mouthpiece. So. It was just something interesting we could show our friends. Bet you don't have one of these. Now this glass here, one of Daddy's first jobs out of college was helping put in the stained glass at one of the chapels at the U.S. Air Force Academy. This is some of the sample glasses that they had for showing the different colors that they were being used. Daddy got the job because he could tell the difference between these 5 different shades of blue that they had. Some calligraphy he did, some pictures from high school. And over here, those of you in the health department might recognize some tools of the trade. I'm missing the flashlight and the forms in triplicate, but it was something that was always in his car. He always had clipboards and thermometers. Later, when I worked in food services, I learned more about that. So, a mic for a ham radio set, and his call sign for ham radio. Hubcap, we think, saw his first car. Daddy and Mother got married. They had a friend importing Mercedes. So instead of buying a Chevy, they had a Mercedes. No big deal. This hat was one of his more local, later acquisitions. And Scott and I had the good fortune of going to Wales with them a couple years ago. He'd won a trip. And Scott and I had the most flexible schedule, so we got to go. And so he took that hat and an oilskin duster as his coat. And he struck a really interesting image out there in Wales, in the pubs. Now the helmet and the racing suit for when he had the Lotus car up at Woody Creek track in Aspen. And what was it? It was called the Taco Bell. The car was called the Taco Bell. One of his uniforms for when he was in the Army, and at the reception we've got a whole book of letters that he wrote home when he was in Germany and scamming. You'll have to read some of the stories. Over the far top picture, I wasn't able to be here for Father's Day and I missed the cruise, so I sent for Father's Day t-shirts and sweatshirts. So everybody on the cruise had a shirt that said George's Junket and Family Vacation. So I had an extra one, so he gave it to the captain of the boat, of the ship, whose name was also George. The first trip that Daddy won is represented in this lower picture. In 1979, there was a contest for a trip for two to Rio de Janeiro. Well, Daddy entered the contest and he picked up passport applications at the post office while he was there. And they made the drawing on George and Carrie's 20th wedding anniversary. So instead of just taking off for a week, we were gone for a month. And all of us went to South America. And Daddy and Paul and I went skiing, and James and Valerie and Mother went to Vina del Mar. And on our stop in Chile, because we had to do something different along the way. And then we went out to Rio de Janeiro. We found out about this little island resort that only the locals went to. So we hightailed it out to this island and spent a better part of a week out there. And then we'll have, if you get an opportunity, come up later and see some of these items, and then we'll have a lot more pictures and things for you later.
We're going to have a couple of folks that know something about my dad come up and speak, but everybody is welcome to that wants to come up. What I'd like to start off with is Kurt Gilmore.
I knew George for about 57 years, and believe it or not, there's some people here in the back row that knew him even longer. I doubt if many people knew him as well as I did. Over the years, we did a number of things together. We climbed some of the 14,000-foot peaks in the state. We both got thrown out of the top of the Marks Bar in a hotel in San Francisco. We were in various enterprises. We bought property together. We bought some tax certificates on tax sales and things like that. We bought various oil properties around. We also had a corporation, Chess Incorporated, because of his interest in chess. He thought that would be unique to have a corporation that way. We worked on various pieces of property that he had around, repairing, putting things together. I helped him carpet the living room in his house. However, Carrie, I want you to know I had nothing to do with the wallpapering and the dining room where he did it with topo maps, USGS topo maps, and covered right over the windows too. I had nothing to do with that one. George was involved in politics. He ran for state representative. He selected me as his campaign manager. I wasn't really much of an asset to him. However, I think he got something like 20 or 30% of the vote in Boulder, which, considering he was running against an incumbent Democrat who was very powerful in the city and Republic of Boulder, and you see the NRA cap over here, that sort of told you where George's politics were. And the fact that he got 20 or 30% of the vote, I thought was remarkable. It was very interesting. He always believed when we were working on various property, he'd go out, you need a light switch or something like this. George bought two. because you probably couldn't find one. But if you had two of them, you'd be able to do that. When he was in politics, it's hard to imagine George as an animated, cheerleading attitude, but he marched in the parade in a white linen suit. And after the parade, he got involved in a tug-of-war contest and wound up in the mud pit in his white linen suit. But that was all right, because George bought two white linen suits. As you can tell, George was rather artistic. This creature back here, a little bit of the background on that, he was taking an art class of some kind. I don't think he was doing very well, either because he hadn't been to class or he hadn't read the book. And it came down towards the end of the year, and he had to do something. So I think it was the last day. He left Boulder, went to a junkyard in Denver, and picked up some parts. Went by a repair shop and welded this together. Turned it in as his class project, and got an A in the class. George was really quite artistic. I don't know as we appreciated this when we were going to school with him, but things like the Air Force Academy Chapel, not only could he tell the colors, but they were having difficulty because you had to put the glass in backwards. George figured out the easiest thing to do with that is to get a mirror, so that makes it backwards, and it was much easier for him to do that. He had an eye for art. I was in the garage one day and George comes by. He had a big picture. He asked me what I thought of it, and I told him it was ugly as sin. And he said, I thought so too, but it had a very nice barnwood frame around it, he'd bought it at a garage sale. And they were asking $25, and he said that because the picture was so ugly, they let him have it for $15. And he borrowed a hammer and immediately proceeded to destroy the barnwood frame. The picture was appraised later for $3,500. George had an eye for that. We went to an auction once. I don't know how we got there or why we were there, but they had a big tray that had jars, pickle jars, mayonnaise jars, and things like this, full of bent and broken, rusty nails and bolts and things like that. And George wound up as a winning bid at $2 for the tray. And as we were walking out, I said, George, you have enough bent, rusty nails. You didn't need any more. What are you going to do with it? Well, he passed by the dumpster, flipped the tray up, threw everything off, and he said, it's a solid silver tray, which he'd gotten for $2. George had various pets over the period of time. I don't recall all of them. I know he had a huge dog that looked sort of like a mountain rug, about 150 pounds or something. But he also had an eye for strange type creatures. When he was going to CC, I went down to see him. He and Carrie were there, and I was sitting on one end of the couch. Carrie was on the other, and George was sitting in front of us. And just in the conversation, George says, "You're not afraid of coyotes, are you?" This wasn't our conversation. And about then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw this flash run across the top of the couch. He had a baby coyote, and it caught my ear as it went by. It bled profusely, didn't hurt, but and ever since then I've been a little cautious when George says, "You're not afraid of something." A lot of George's attitude was mentioned. It was sort of, but there were, underneath that attitude, he really did care deeply about a lot of things. He was quite generous. sometimes a little strange, but we got a call one night, and he said, I have 100 sacks, gunny sack dresses, which if you remember in the 70s, those were all the rage. Would your girls like some? So we went up to see George. Well, he had 100 of them in the living room, and everybody came in and they got to pick out what they liked. Turns out he got it at the same place that he'd gotten his white linen suits, which was the railroad salvage. And in some of the newspaper articles, you might have known that Carrie is of Lakewood and Silver Plume as an address. George bought a piece of property in Silver Plume that a friend of his had and was moving on, and I don't think George really wanted it. It sort of tilted a little bit to one side. It's still there, by the way. It's pink. It's right above the antique train that goes up the Georgetown Loop. But he bought that, and he just liked to keep an address because there are not many people from Silver Plume, Colorado. He also had a great deal of patience. Of course, with 4 kids, you have to. But in his work, which was a lot of it was inspecting restaurants, part of the area he had was down on South Federal, which there was a lot of Asian who had come over from Cambodia and whatnot, and they didn't speak the language. One restaurant in particular, their specialty was roast duck. George was very patient in explaining to the owner that fresh roast duck is nice, but first of all, you shouldn't go to the park and get the ducks. And then, after you have them, you don't tie a string around their foot and tether them to the stove. That was not according to health standards in the city and county of Denver. He had the same type problem with a Hispanic fellow who was very happy to show George that he was using some American ingenuity in preparing his tossed salad. George diplomatically explained to him, you don't use a dryer to do that. He also had a little bit of courage to go with that, because if you ever walked into a truck stop at the busy hour and told them that they had to put all of the meals they just cooked down the garbage disposal because they hadn't passed their inspection or made the corrections, when you have a room full of hungry truckers, that takes a little bit of guts. George never told anybody he had to close. He said they just couldn't serve. They could stay open and clean. And with all of the other attributes that George had, he did have one very serious defect. We sort of have identified that as a pack rat gene. George had stuff where other people don't even have places. His idea was to buy, but he never quite got the selling side of it put together. And Carrie, as you go through his stuff, hang on to James, because I understand James has inherited this gene, although he tends to be a little more organized. George, with his lackadaisical attitude, had a lot of pride. He was very proud of the work he did. He didn't take promotions. He stayed in the field because that's where he liked to be. He could think of a lot of reasons for you as to why he should be in the field. He had various properties around he'd have to stop and see, but he was always very conscientious. He didn't stop anywhere that wasn't on his route going somewhere, and if he had to do something, he would take time off to do it. But he was very, very good in the health field, and he enjoyed it a great deal. He also took a great deal of pride in his family. All of the accomplishments or endeavors that any of his kids entered into. I know at one time Carrie had a pottery shop, and George was quite proud that he had 2 girls who could run a cash register, compute sales tax, and give you the correct change when their peers were still trying to add up 2 and 2. He thought that was quite an accomplishment. He also told me some stories about the boys, which I won't go into. But he had a great deal of pride in everything that his family did. All of his abilities and his traits tended to form a unique individual, and the best way to describe him was, been there, done that, and I did it my way. A number of people have asked me how you explain George Bailey. And I told them there's no way you explain George. I just feel very fortunate to have had a friend like George in my life. And I'll miss him a great deal.
Next, I'd like to ask another George to come up, George Whitcomb, who knew something about my dad and his endeavors in sports car land.
Thank you, Paul. And Kurt, you covered a vast amount of territory that I otherwise will not have to cover. So I'm going to, George was a remarkable person. I'm going to say that, and I'll stand behind it forever. George Bailey was one of the most remarkable people I have ever known. He was extraordinarily creative. Witness the statue back here. I heard a great number of stories about the stained glass, which we will not repeat, but I'm going to address an area where George and I had a great deal in common. George and I are both accumulators. George and I collect everything, and George and you see all these vanity license plates here. George had to have something to put the vanity plates on. I think George had as many vehicles, and I think that's the proper word for it, vehicles, as any person I have ever been fortunate enough to know. And George and I, both, since we both grew up in the 30s and 40s, had an abiding love affair with any vehicle. And George, however, once he got a vehicle, he didn't want to let go of it. And so George, fortunately, had some places he could store these things. But I mean, he had vehicles scattered in places that many of his friends never even knew existed. And on occasion, we would get together and move some of these vehicles because municipal authorities didn't understand all this. And my first meeting with George, and I have to tell this, even though it reflects a little badly perhaps on me. I met George through the TARMS, or the Thursday Afternoon Racing and Motoring Society. And Bob Mather had taken me to this Thursday luncheon for the very first time, and that is when I met George Bailey, who was holding forth with someone, I think it was Ed Hoffman who is here today, about this crazy lawyer who was threatening to sue BSCE, the Boulder Sports Car Club, about a rally. Well, I introduced myself to George as that crazy lawyer. And of course, Carl Anuto is also here today, and I had already settled the case. I mean, we settled it within 5 minutes of our first conversation on the phone. Carl was not there that day, but I still remember George's reaction on meeting the crazy lawyer. We discovered we had cars in common anyway. And I went on to be George's lawyer for a great number of years. And it was one of the most enjoyable periods of my life being George's lawyer. George was a very creative person, very creative. And as a result, I always had plenty of work to do. This is and I'm sorry that we don't have today, but I'm going to find it, a slide I took of George standing next to his Lotus Super 7 at Continental Divide Raceway during one of the races in the back in the 70s. And Continental Divide Raceway, it will be sorely missed. It was a wonderful road racing facility. But George had somehow managed to get backing for this Lotus Super 7 through Taco Bell, and every time I asked him about it, he would dodge the question. How did you get Taco Bell to back you? We'll talk about it later. I never did find out how he got Taco Bell to support a delightful activity like racing. But at any rate, the picture I was referring to, and which I started with just a minute ago, shows George standing by his Lotus Super 7 with this happy grin on his face, holding the fender in his hand. And I'm so sorry I haven't turned that picture up, but I will. And it goes back to the slide days, and now nobody takes slides, and so I have these thousands and thousands of slides there, because like George, I am an accumulator. I will find that picture. I could go on and on about George and automobiles. I can still remember his childish delight, and this is exactly that. When he discovered that he could take one of the old three-cylinder Saabs, front-wheel drive Saabs, and just drive rings around people on ice. And there was an ice event after one of the rallies he was associated with, and he didn't go on rallies to rally so much. He wanted to participate in the after events, and that's why George, when he did go on rallies, would go on a rally. I could go on and on and on about what a wonderful person George Bailey, in my mind, still is. I will always treasure the times that George shared with me and my family, and I will miss him very, very much. And I will always remember him standing there with his fender next to his broken Lotus Super 7. Thank you.
We handed out a lot of notepads for people to take notes or just give us notes that they might have thought of things that they'd like to say or just wanted to pass along to the family. If anyone would like to come up and speak here, you're welcome to come up now. It's not a requirement, certainly, but if you do have an urge to come up and say something, we'd invite that. If you can, of course, be sure to write little notes down that will be helpful too, because we'd like to collect those in kind of a scrapbook, because of course we all collect things too. After this ceremony is over, then we're going to go over to the American Legion Hall, and in the pamphlets that you've received is a map to get you there. Not a precise map, but 8th Avenue does not any longer connect through to Kipling, as I have found out, but there is a way to go over there. So if there's anyone else that would like to come up, and Carl.
I was sitting, Carl and Uta, I was sitting there thinking of listening to Kurt and George Whitcomb on a number of things. Kurt, as I understood, one of the reasons he bought that house in Silver Plume was so he could license his cars from Silver Plume and not have to go through air emissions. And it was cheaper in Clear Creek County than it was in Denver County. You also mentioned the dog, and this is something the kids, I'm sure, could tell, but I have a recollection of George telling a story when we got home from Ski Treffen, which was the Steamboat Springs program, and I'll mention that too. We came home one time and George laughed a couple days later and he said, let me tell you the story. He said, we got in the house and we'd kept that dog, I can't remember the name, it was a Newfoundland, and it did stand about that high. The kids, when they were young, rode it like a horse. The dog had been left in the garage. They were living out in Fairview Estates then. And the door from the garage into the house was lying flat inside the house. Apparently the dog had come through the door and knocked it off the hinges. And George and Carrie, I guess, were about ready to just throw the dog out, and you know, that was it as far as they were concerned. And George went looking around the house and he found on the inside paw prints by the front window like this. And on the outside, footprints. And he figured a burglar had come to the house and tried to open that front window, and the dog had heard it and come through the garage door and hit him like this. And I tell you, if you want a 150-pound dog coming at you, the burglar's probably still running. George said they gave the dog a steak. I met George, I think it was through the Boulder Amateur Radio Club. And it turned out we had a lot in common because we were both had a ham radio license. He was much more active, and I see he's a life member in the ARRL, and I don't think I ever was, more than a year or two maybe. But he got me involved in trying to start a television station in Boulder. We even got a license on it, as a matter of fact, for Channel 14, never put it on the air. We met a lot of other people through that. About that time, I got a TR3, and so I joined the Boulder Sports Car Enthusiasts, where George was also very active. And subsequently, I ended up with an MGB. George and I both had Mercedes at different times. We both had Alphas at different times, and we both had Saabs. I've still got a Saab. So we had a lot in common there too. But one time, and I don't remember why it was, I managed to convince George to go with me as a navigator on this Ski Treffen rally. I think it was partly that we both knew how to ski, and we were both sports car enthusiasts and knew how to rally. This was not a race, but a rally. And we started out on my MGB, and it must have been like 68, 69 someplace. One of these trophies up here is from Ski Treffen in 68. And we drove from Boulder through Golden, and I think we picked up the instructions in Golden and started off about 5 or 6 in the evening. And we blew a radiator hose about the 3rd tunnel in Clear Creek Canyon, turned the car around, coasted down to Golden, tried to call Carrie. I don't think she was there, and we ended up, was it Rick Tedrick or Tedley, a friend of his over in East Denver, where we finally hooked up with Carrie, who brought the Saab down, and I navigated, and he drove the Saab. We got to Steamboat Springs probably around 3 o'clock in the morning, and we didn't ski much the next day, but he did drive the Saab, and we pulled, it may have been the picture of him behind the car here ski touring. We had a lot of fun together. Ski Treffen was a great time. Sports car rallying was a great time. We always enjoyed George. He always seemed to be the luckiest guy, but I think he was lucky because he worked at it. So, neat guy.
Anyone else that would like to come forward?
I'm Lindy Doty Nystrom, and my association with George and Carrie and their family is from the 60s and 70s and early 80s for the sports car group. And I thought maybe the health inspector people, the health department people who are here might enjoy this story also. In the 80s, my husband, Dick Doty, was running a lot of apartment houses, and each one had a swimming pool. And he got a call from a resident, and she said that she was sure that she'd gotten gonorrhea from his swimming pool. And Dick told her he didn't think it was possible, but he had a friend who was in the health inspection business, and he would call, of course it was George. So he called up George, and I can just see George saying this. Dick told him the situation, and this is what George said. He said, "Well, I've never heard of such a thing, Dick, but I can't vouch for what people might do in your swimming pool." And Dick told that story many, many times and enjoyed that. So I'm sure we'll all miss George. He was a special person.
Am I too short for this? This is not a picnic lunch. It's something I have to show you. Can you hear me? Oh, good, good. George Whitcomb always, I'm Paulette Whitcomb. George always calls it accumulator. It's a nice word. The word is pack rat. I have used other words in the past. All I know is that, as I used to tell both Georges many times, it's a good thing you guys weren't born Mormons. Yes. The gene was there, you know. Anyway, I remember very fondly George's dump trips, as he used to call them, mid-70s. He had acquired, even for Bailey, a hell of a lot of stuff. And so he used to, and he didn't want to have to pay to have it carted off. That was one of his abiding principles, as we all know, right? Right? And so he would go to the dump every Saturday morning. And he was in that, well, maybe not every Saturday, but it seemed like it. And he used to stop by our house, and he used to either ring the doorbell or just wander in and then say, I was on the way to the dump and I thought I'd stop by. Where's George? And he would disappear and they would talk, whatever. And most of the time, the accumulator would show up, would find me somewhere, the laundry room, wherever. And he'd show up with something. Once he had this little Vesuviana. It's one of the little Italian coffee makers. And he comes up and he says, well, you're half Italian, so you probably know what to do with this. I don't know what to do with this. It's kind of bent over here on the side. I said, where'd you get it? And he said, well, this semi on the, burned, you know, kind of half burned, kind of, I bought it, bought the contents. Yeah. So I got the Vesuviana. The next week, see, he'd sort through these things and go to the dump and dump what he didn't want. And then we were on the way to the dump, you know. So I got, let me see, about 5 cans of Brazilian coffee. And then one day he had, you all remember those paws, those gigantic hands. And he was in his go-to-dump clothes. And he rings the doorbell, and he's got this incredible creation, pearls and pink satin and ruffles and lace and stuff. And Kurt said it, gunny sacks. And he's standing there with this thing in his hand, and he gives it to me, and he says, you're the smallest grown woman I know. You can wear this, can't you? Where's George? I said, in the garage. Okay, see you later. The dog, you reminded me of the dog, that damn dog. He chewed up my dress, not the gunny sacks. Wasn't his name Brutus? Chip? Huh. I'm sure it was the same dog. We came over, and that evening for dinner is the first time I ever saw a microwave in operation. I didn't even know microwaves existed. And Carrie, you had to fix dinner in the microwave. So we ate sort of like in relays, as I recall. And the whole time, the dog was huge. I am not huge. I was wearing, you know, in those days we wore these granny dresses type things, and mine happened to be navy blue. Navy blue went real well with that fur, and navy blue with white lace. And he really liked me, and he tried to curl up on my lap. I fell off with my dinner plate, whatever. Anyway, he ate it up, and he kept chewing on the lace, and he finally got enough in his mouth to go rip. And so next time George came by, I said, here, take this to the dump. I love that dog, though. He was nice. Anyway, I have a story. When George ran for assessor in Boulder, I ended up working on the brochure, you know, the brochure. And there was a word that I thought was so perfect for him. His opponent was a mess, and he wasn't any good financially and all that. And I just thought George was the linchpin of every group he had ever been part of. The linchpin. You're all nodding, yeah. Well, nobody then used the word linchpin in politics. And I can still see George. I wrote the whole thing, you know, and he's sitting there reading it, and he goes, I like to, yeah. He gives me the look. He's linchpin. I said, yeah, linchpin, it's a really great word for that. And he goes, I'm running in Boulder, it's bad enough as it is. You know, linchpin? I said, yeah, linchpin. I never seen any political literature with linchpin in it. I said, well, be the first. Go on, George. I really, and I could tell, you know, I mean, you know, I wasn't going to use linchpin. We took linchpin out. Well, I'm not kidding, about like maybe 3 weeks to a month after that election, the word linchpin is all over the media. So-and-so is a linchpin. I mean, women were linchpins of their, whatever, PTA group. I mean, linchpin. Okay, about maybe 4 months later, George comes by the house, and he's got this box of biscuits. As I recall, you were with him, Carrie. You had bought the box of biscuits, and he had decided that I needed this. You see this? It's a linchpin. I think yeah, it still plays. When you guys were over with Valerie to watch the soccer match, he spotted it in the kitchen. I keep it on the kitchen island. He says, you still have that thing? And I said, oh, sure. Open it up, George. So George opens it up. And of course, on the side is the leaflet, as well as the, oh, there's a button, you know, Bailey for assessor. And then he gets this really happy look on his face. Really happy look. I said, in your honor, Bailey, there's more rubber bands and plastic ties here that I will ever need in my life. And I said, "You're a pack rat. I'm sorry, accumulator, and you always will be, and so will George Whitcomb, and somebody ought to put you in contempt of something or other and lock you up before you collect more stuff than..." I always thought it was a nice thing that he wasn't King of England. Can you imagine what London would have become? It's already big enough. He would have amassed more stuff. Anyway, those are some of the George stories. Just some.
Well, I want to thank everybody again for coming down. We're going to go to the American Legion Post 178 after this, but first I'd like to have Kurt come down and talk just a brief moment about a thing that we've set up with Lakewood High School. Oh, I'm sorry. Richard wants to talk. I'm sorry about that. Let's, Richard Rodemacher.
My name is Richard Rodemacher. George and I were cousins. My mother and his mother were sisters, both from Sedalia, Missouri. And there's a lot of firsts that George and I share. I used to come to Colorado because Nebraska was very boring. So I'd rent these rent-a-car things where they get stuck in Omaha and they can't get out. I was the guy who drove back to Denver. I had to pay for the gas, but I had my first mountain climbing experience with George. We climbed Grays and Torrey's Peaks. Saw my first football game, professional football game. I saw Slinging Sammy Baugh throw a 65-yard jump pass, and the guy caught it. And I think I was either senior high school, maybe a freshman in college, but George and I were there with his father, Doc Bailey. And I'll never forget that game, because those guys are in the tackiest uniforms you've ever seen in your life. And I don't know why they played that game. And they played out here in Lakewood High School. This was back 52, 53, somewhere around there. Anyway, I had my first experience eye to eye with a coyote that everybody talked about earlier. I'd gone down to see George and Carrie. I think they were in Boulder. I'm not sure where they were. They'd been married a year or two. I'd knock on the screen door, and there's this coyote staring me in the face about 2 seconds. Oh, boy. Fortunately, Carrie said it doesn't bite. But you know how women are. Anyway, I also got a chance to spend some time with my grandmother a long time ago. I drove in, just dropped in one weekend. And George and his mother and father went off to go fishing, and I got to spend some good quality time with my grandmother. And it was really good. She made an apple pie, and it was the best one I ever had. And then everybody who knows me well knows my driving habits aren't the best. I had my first car accident here in Colorado. What you doing that? I've had a couple of since also. We were up in the mountains, and I begged George to let me drive his mother's car. It was an old Pontiac straight, I think it was a straight 6, straight 8, something like that. The thing would go up the hill like crazy. So finally he relented. He gave me the go around this corner, going probably 35, which is probably 10 miles too fast for my driving experience at the time. Anyway, it was either go off the side of the cliff or hit the big rock in front of me, so I hit the rock. And Dr. Bailey came out and said, "Well, everybody okay?" I said, "Yeah, okay." So I felt sheepish, but the one thing I really want to compliment George and Carrie on is the way they raised their family. There's an attorney a long time ago, Clarence Darrow. They said he wanted to be remembered by saying he was a hell of a man, and I think George was a hell of a man. Thank you.
Kurt come up, and we'll talk just briefly about something that we're setting up for Lakewood High School.
Couple of months, I guess, before George knew that he was sick, I approached Paul with the idea of setting up a memorial for Doc Bailey, since he had done an awful lot for the school district and Lakewood in particular. And He was very hard to sell. He was standing on a chair adjusting a speaker. I think it took about 2 or 3 minutes. He said, that sounds like a good idea. Then when George got sick, they decided that they would like to expand this to include both Doc and George. Anyway, the Jefferson Foundation, it's an organization that supports the Jefferson County Public Schools. We've set up a memorial fund there, which will benefit a Lakewood High School student who's going into the health field or medicine or something like that. Criteria will be based on public service, financial need, and academics. And so anybody who would like to make a donation to that foundation can do so by sending donations to the Jefferson Foundation, care of the George Bailey Memorial Scholarship Fund, 809 Quayle Street, Building 1, Lakewood, Colorado 80215. The information is printed on the back of the program. And this will be an endowment so that it will be a perpetual scholarship. The family will be involved in the selection of the scholarship winners. And then as time goes by, the foundation will do those things. For right now, we're getting contributions in. The foundation is sending out thank you letters and appreciation for the contributions, but also providing any tax information that may be needed. So anybody who wishes to make a contribution, I would encourage them to do so. The biggest investment that any of us can make is in the future. George initially supported the idea of a memorial for his father. I don't know how he felt about having himself included in that, but I think he was down underneath, he was honored by it. Anyway, any contributions people wish to make will be appreciated.
And that brings me to the kind of culmination of this part of the ceremony. I'd like to lapse into a Garrison Keillor or perhaps Bill Cosby-ish little spiel. He enjoyed a lot of these comedy records and comedy things, and I can just imagine him coming out of Boulder, early 60s sometime, driving and turning before he had to pay the toll on the Boulder Turnpike, because that was 25 cents, and he wouldn't have to pay that. He would just go straight south towards Lakewood. And maybe he was driving one of these sports cars, and he got to the side of Rocky Flats, and something happened. Maybe the radiator blew or the battery was boiling or something. He stops by the side of the road, and he sees something shiny, and he goes over to grab it, just as some other thing sees that. And like in the movies today and comic books, some radioactive creature bit him. It was a pack rat, and he became Pack Rat Man. And he had amazing superpowers to collect stuff. Okay, whereas another one of his records that he had in his collection was George Carlin saying, "A house is a place where you put your stuff while you go out and get more stuff." Well, he got more buildings to put more stuff in because he had these superpowers. And eventually, those also translated and mutated into other powers of contest entry. He won a car, he won a couple of trips. Every piece of logo stuff you ever saw that was in a contest, he won, from baked beans to Jim Beam, whatever it was stuff. And we knew what we were getting for Christmas because it would be something that he won in a contest. But when this all gets accumulated, this stuff, archaeologists use pack rat middens to find out about societies of the past, because these pack rats would live near people, and they'd collect little bits of things, and they could date and find out things from these pack rat middens and assess the past. Well, we're going to be using the midden of George to actually help the future, because there's a lot of things that were collected in this huge amount of stuff that are very valuable. Some of them are old paintings that you look at and say, what is that? And somebody knows that that painting's worth $3,000 or $20,000, or there's various artifacts of that type. Well, there's this new technology called eBay, okay? And one of the great things that's going to happen is that his midden is going to live on in this relationship that we have with the Jefferson Foundation, because the money that is generated on eBay from these things is going to go into that foundation. So it'll always, perpetually, there'll be a pack rat thing that George Bailey had done. So with that, I'd like to thank you all for coming, and we're going to have lunch now over at the American Legion. There's the map on the back of your pamphlet, and thank you again for all coming to this ceremony. Oh, we have one other thing. Sorry, I keep missing my cues.
Thank you all for coming also. But please, over at the American Legion, we are going to have